Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to show you a short little video on how you guys can find and identify pure clay whenever you're out in the woods like you can see here. So without further ado, let's get started and let's go find ourselves some clay. As I was walking through the woods, I found this old well that you guys can see right here. I realized that it's a well because as you guys can see, those rocks there, and those rocks are lined up way too perfect. And this is way too perfect of a circle for this to be natural. So this is an old well, and one thing that tells me that there used to be an old settlement here or an old house here. So that's really cool to see. You never know what you're going to find out in the woods. Check out this really awesome rock wall here by this creek bed that I'm walking. This is really awesome to see. We don't get too much of this here in Indiana, so this is kind of a rare sight where I live. But here you guys can see really good what this is. This is mainly clay. Most of this coming out of this section is absolute pure clay. And you can tell that just because of the color and the texture of it. However, all of this is clay. You could actually extract a lot of clay from this material. All you'd have to do is really wash it and kind of separate a lot of the dirt and grit and leaves and sticks out, and you'd have some really good clay. However, I did want to show you guys how to find and identify pure clay in stone form so you don't have to deal with this stuff. Now if we look down here on the ground, we can see this huge chunk, and if I remove the leaves and debris, you can see this is actually a huge stone that is comprised mainly of clay. As you can see here, as I pull this off, you can see all this clay, and this thing is just absolutely disintegrating. And as you can see, this is just turning to absolute dust. A lot of dirt, a lot of grime. But what this tells us is that there is plenty of clay here. And if we come down here by the creek bed, and then once we get right by the creek, here we can see some actual clay. Again, there's a lot of sand and little pea gravel inside of this, so it wouldn't make very good pots in this stage or in this consistency. But there you guys can see another big stone of clay. Right over there you can see another one, and over there you can see another one. See another one there. All that gray that you see at the bottom of this hill is all ground up clay, and most of these stones that you're going to see are comprised of clay themselves. However, let's say we don't want to deal with all of this rocks and dirt and grime and sand and pebbles. We don't have to. We can find pure clay in rock form. Now, as a matter of fact, right next to me I see a nice sized piece right here. This right here is pure clay. There is going to be a little bit of dirt on the outside, however, that's not going to hurt anything. You can see just how soft this is. I can almost break this. I did break that section off with my thumb over there. You can see it breaks off very easily. And then if we look up close and personal at this, we can actually see the fine sediment and we can see the layers that it has been compressed into. And this is a good way to know that it's clay, is because of its dark gray color or a light gray color. The stone is going to feel very smooth. Even though it may look rough, it will feel smooth and almost velvety. This has that velvety-like feel to it. We can see that fine sediment. We can even see some slight fossils there, actually, which is really cool as well. So if you're looking for pure clay in rock form, you want to go where there are a lot of rocks, and you want to go down by a creek bed. First, you want to look for other clay that isn't so good. So you want to look for clay that isn't in its prime. And in the area, you're going to find more clay in its prime, like the one I just showed you. You know, I move over just a little bit more, and I can see here's another good piece of clay right here. This is small, yes. It does have some impurities, as we can see on the back, but this is still pure clay. It's a lot more pure than the stuff coming out of that hill, and a lot more pure than the stuff you'd be digging out of your yard. We go down just a little bit more, and here we can see another really nice example of pure clay. So there is a lot of clay here. A lot of it is in good condition. A lot of it is very bright, very clean overall. Right here we can see another really good example of pure clay in its rock form. I usually check to find that I have clay by the color, the texture whenever I examine it up close, and the feel. Whenever I feel it with my fingers, it should feel very soft and it should feel very, very smooth. So between some of these big boulders that you find out here that are this size, the crumbled up pieces that you're going to find next to them, and any other smaller, more fine pieces of clay that you find. You can really walk out of the woods with a whole lot of clay. This here is some really prime clay, I can tell, because it's super soft. And then once we get up close and personal, you can see the consistency and the texture. So you can see this very fine, gritty-like substance in here, and that is the clay. Those are the clay particles there. And you can see just how easy this breaks. And then again, there you guys can see the inside of it to help give you an idea of what to look for. Here you guys can see another really nice example of clay. I just broke this little tip off by accident just by picking it up. You can see how crumbly this is. This is way more pure than some of the other ones we just looked at. And if we get up close and personal again, we can actually see just how pure this is. There isn't very much grit inside of this one. So this is going to be some really good clay to be using here. Okay, so let's say you've wandered an entire creek bottom and you think you found a bunch of stuff that might be clay, but you don't know. And you're seeing a lot of other rocks that are the same color and maybe even the same texture. How do you tell which is clay and which isn't? If we look at this rock here, its color is very, very different. Obviously, it's a darker brown. So this has more sand. This is more of a sandstone type rock. But whenever we look at it up close, it does have a texture that's similar to clay. However, its color is vastly different. There is clay that is more brown or reddish brown. So keep that in mind whenever you're looking for clay. But in most cases, you want to try to avoid clay that is this brown because it won't fire as good generally. But that also does depend on the type of clay it is too. This rock right here that my finger is on is a really good example of how some rocks can look like clay and even feel like clay but not be clay. This looks color-wise the same. It feels very smooth to the touch on my fingers. If we look at it up close though, we can see there is a slight difference in texture. The grains are not only much finer, but they're also a lot more compressed, meaning this stone has a whole lot more mass and density than the clay does, so it is a lot heavier for the size that it is. Also, if we look just right behind it here, we can see another rock that looks very similar in color. We can see this color is gray. It's got that brown reddish dirt on the outside. These two look very similar in color. However, you can see these little scrapes here. One of the really good ways you can test for clay is by using your fingernail. Now see how I'm scraping this with my fingernail, and it looks like it's causing scrapes in the rock. But as I rub it off, it's not doing anything to the rock at all. It's actually filing my fingernail for me. And those are those little streaks that we're seeing. However, if we take our fingernail on this one and we scrape it, we can actually see how easy it is and feel how easy it is to scrape off the clay or the dust. And this lets us know that this stone or this clay isn't any harder than our fingernail. Clay will never be harder than a 4 on the Mohs scale of hardness. Your fingernail is a 4 on that scale of hardness. So on this one, as you guys can see, the dust that's been collected from me scraping, whereas on this one, it didn't even make a dent. It didn't do anything to it at all. So that's another really good way that you guys can test for pure clay whenever you're out in the woods and you don't have anything on you. If we look around and we find another gray rock that is very light in color, like this one here, again, we can do the same test. Just take your finger, scrape it across, and then there you guys can see the dust, or you can see the indentation that's made by my fingernail in this clay. And again, we're going to do the fingernail test on this rock here, this piece of clay, and there you can actually see the dust coming off. This means that this is much purer clay than some of the others that we just tested. And there you guys can see that very, very fine clay dust that's gathered from scraping it with my fingernail. It doesn't take very much force at all because the clay is around a 2.5 to a 3.5. Your fingernail is usually a 4. The hardness of the clay will depend on what minerals are inside of it. Like for example, on the outside of this piece of clay, you can see this orangish, reddish, brown color. This is from iron and dirt and sand that's gotten mixed in. So if we scrape the outside of this, it's going to be a lot harder than the inside. So let's test this here. This is super hard. This is a lot harder than my fingernail. And there again, you guys can see that it didn't even really make a dent inside of this stone. And again, that's because the minerals on the outside make it much, much harder than the inside where all of the pure clay lies. Here I wanted to show you guys all of these mushrooms on this tree. I don't know what kind of mushrooms these are, there are a whole lot of them. I apologize for the super white background. I still haven't learned how to shoot in bright sunlight in my DSLR yet. But there you can see all of those mushrooms. I mean, this tree is just absolutely covered. Whenever we get underneath the mushrooms and look up close, we can see that this was a polypore mushroom, or is a polypore mushroom. There are no gills on the underside. So it's a shelf-growing mushroom that's a polypore. It's also saprobic because it's growing on a tree. So that tells me a couple good features about this mushroom. And if we take a look at the type of tree that it's growing on, if we look at this bark, we can actually see that this is an oak of some kind. And if we look on the ground below it, we're going to see all kinds of oak leaves. Most of them have pointed tips. This one has slightly rounded tips, but most of them have pointed tips, like you can see on all of these leaves. And since the majority of these leaves on the ground next to this tree have pointed leaves, that tells me that this tree is probably a red or a black oak. So that's really interesting to know, because there might also be maitakes or chicken of the woods growing later in the year if this tree has those spores within it. I thought I'd show you guys this really tiny little bitty mushroom that I almost stepped on growing on this log. I thought that was really cool. So I thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned just a little bit of something. If you want to learn more about edible or medicinal plants, make sure to subscribe.